Hi everybody. Welcome to the March edition of the Consumer Musical Artistry, where we are really trying to share insights through the eyes of the composer. And I can't tell you how excited I am to have Brian Balmages with us this evening. Brian is known worldwide not only as a composer, but also as a wonderful conductor. And his work span the worlds of orchestral and chamber music, and of course, band music. And he's won many, many honors and awards. And his music has been performed from groups ranging to professional symphony orchestras to, middle school and elementary bands. So, Brian, we are so excited to have you today. And this is a very brief, a little 20-minute segment. So I'm just going to throw out the question that is most on our minds. And I know it would take hours to answer in detail, but here we go. For the conductor who's just opened one of your scores for the first time, what would you like for him or her to see? How do we get to the music?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, thanks for having me. It's great to be here and to chat with you and to share some of these ideas. Everyone who knows me or has seen me work with a group knows that to me, from the very first moment I give a downbeat or anything, I insist on musicianship, right? Whether they're sight reading or whether they've been prepared, but I then show up and we're interacting for the first time. I insist on that. And I think it sets the groundwork very, very well. I think a great thing to do would probably be for me to open up a score and kind of take a look at it. And so one of the pieces that I kind of want to look at is a piece that everybody's probably very familiar with right now because it's a piece that came out just about a year ago. And the piece is Kiev 2022. And for those who do not recall or not familiar with the piece, it's called A Sequel to Moscow 1941. And I came out with this piece weeks after the invasion into Ukraine. And for those who don't remember, Moscow 1941 was set in World War II with the Russians defending Moscow against the German invasion. And here we are decades and decades later, and now the victim, right? The person defending has now become the aggressor. And I really wanted to highlight that and to use this as a way to showcase, number one, that no matter how small a person you are, we all can make a difference. And I'd love to share that this piece at up until this point, I believe we've raised close to $75,000 that has gone into organizations in Ukraine. So it's been pretty remarkable. I think over 1,000 groups have now either programmed it or have it. And so anyway, that all being said, I thought, man, what a great way to talk about the music. And so, right, we've got the score here, and my score is over here, so I'll be going back and forth between the two of you. But a lot of times people, the first thing they're looking at is they're looking at the key signature, they're looking at the time signature. I love when people say, oh, I'm doing my score study, and the first thing they do is they go through and they write in all the time signatures really large. I always joke around and I say, that's not score study, that's just writing in time signatures very large, right? and so they'll be looking at, all right, let me mark where the cues are, let me mark. To me, that's not really score study, that's performance study, right? That's me being able to be functional but not studying the score. So what do I want people to see? The first thing that I want people to see, and most people don't see it, is the very first word that I wrote, which is the word menacing. Okay? People don't look at that. They don't focus on that. But to me, this whole thing, right, defines the way we're going to play everything. Menacing gives a character to those accents. Accents, as we all know, can be played a million different ways. There are Strauss accents, there are Mahler accents, there are March accents, there are symphonic accents, and these are meant to be menacing. They're meant to be aggressive. And so the reason why that word menacing is so important to me is because sometimes people will try to overbalance things, right? Look at measure 2 for a moment, and we'll play it in a minute, but you look at measure 2 and you're going to see all kinds of stuff here, right? We see the low D in the tuba, we see an A above it in euphonium, but then we see an B flat in trombone 2. Right? Then we see that concert D in bass clarinet, but then we see the B flat again in the bassoon, And then we see the A. So there's a grind there. And I think sometimes people are trying to shy away. I want, it's menacing, right? It's absolutely menacing. And then we look at the percussion and we see there's a big element there. And so let's play a minute and kind of go through a little bit of this really quickly. You can hear that grind, right? Now, already, I want to highlight just one thing here. So we have that opening, and that kind of defines where we're going with the whole piece. Now, we can hear the percussion. Now, again, looking at the history of the piece, I wish people would look at the program notes and realize that that measure 2, that is a cadence of an invading army, right? So you have, it's very aggressive. It's very intense. And so very often, a group is going to look at measure 2 and say, percussion, you're too loud. You've got to balance the winds. Okay. We're in the middle of a war of this massive army who is paying no regard to civilian life, and they are attacking and killing. There, at that moment, there's no balance, right? David Maslanka talked about it all the time. Sometimes there's no balance in certain emotional contexts, and that's a great example. So I always say, no, percussion comes up there. They come up there, and there's a musical justification for that, right? And we even have that crescendo. Now, of course, with younger groups, we want to make sure that they're always doing it with a good quality of sound. But very often we take, especially those younger groups, and we put them in their little box and we say, oh, don't get too bright. Don't get too bright. Folks, a trumpet is allowed to be bright. You listen to the Chicago Symphony, you listen to Houston Symphony, Dallas. There are moments where the brass section gets really bright. It's a characteristic of the instrument, right? And so notice I have not really talked about much about anything about time. I haven't talked about keying. I haven't really, everything we're talking about right now is emotional intent and how it informs performance, right? And so all of those elements then take us into measure 4. All right. And we can start right there in measure 4 for a moment. With such an aggressive arrival, measure 4 almost seems like you fall off a cliff for a moment, right? And that is very intentional, but we can't arrive there unless that crescendo is continuously happening in through measure 3. And again, with the percussion, boom. Now, I personally, even though it's a great recording, I would love to hear even a little bit more crescendo on that in measure 9 for the same reasons that we just outlined, right? So now let's go in here when we start talking about line. We start talking about line. Measure 11, this is the prayer for Ukraine, right? It's a very emotional piece for those, especially in Ukraine. It became kind of like a symbol of Ukrainians and their resolve. And so there's all of the moments going on, and just listen to a little bit of, this is me conducting, by the way, this particular recording. But you can listen to a little bit of what we're trying to do with the line here. Now, one thing I want to talk about before we move on, and I know I keep stopping, but so often we'll see, and this is very typical with the younger group as well, we're looking at the articulation, right? And I do that intentionally because there's certain sounds that I want, but really, measure 11 is one giant slur. Okay. And so what I'm thinking about is when I'm having a director look at this, I wish that they would look at the phrases, not the slurs, but the phrases. And so here, very often I hear ta, 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 ta. That's not how you would sing it, right? It was never how you would sing it. So how would they sing it? Exactly the way the flute player is playing it. And so we've got to start thinking about, okay, where's the line? And are the slurs showing the line, or are the slurs showing the tonguing? And if the slurs are showing the tonguing, great. Now where's the line? And how do I get those kids to play the line, which are 2 completely different things? So let's go on here for a second. So I want to draw attention to it. Measure 15, I pulled back, right? I pulled back in measure 15, and it doesn't say to do that, right? I do it all the time. I do it all the time. Maybe the next time I do it, I won't pull back quite so much in 15. But one of the things that I wish people would look for also is, where are the moments where the piece can breathe? Where are the moments where the music can be malleable? And to me, 15 was one of those places. It was one of those places where I felt like if I want to pull back ever so slightly, it's so musical, but there's no ritardando mark there. So why do we do it? Because there's no accelerando or retardando when we talk. We never have accelerando when we're speaking and we're getting agitated. We just do it because it makes sense from a communication standpoint. Some reason we pick up a baton or we pick up an instrument and we turn that side of turn that part of ourselves off, which is a shame, because I feel like that's the very thing that makes us human, right? And so I always joke around about how an instrument is like a giant off switch to being human, right? And so right now what we're trying to do is just turn back on all those switches that are normally on outside of music. And so let's go on for a moment and just kind of talk about a few other things. So you can see the line in the low voices. There. Look at this. Now, I want to draw attention here. Another thing. This is a great example where I think directors sometimes try to overbalance too much, right? We have a piano dynamic level in the winds. I believe we're at piano. Yep, we are at piano. We are at piano dynamic level in the winds. Percussion, I have it fortissimo. Again, this idea of this beautiful prayer for Ukraine being constantly interrupted in a very menacing way. Very menacing way. And then we've got the trumpets, who are just slightly above that Ukraine, kind of, again, this echo of what's coming, right? That Moscow theme, that Meadowlands theme. And so you can hear lots of different things going on right here, all right? Let's find the phrase right here. So many people want to breathe there. You can't. Let's talk about something else really quickly while we're here. And again, I'm going to all talk about line. I'm going to talk about phrasing, and I'm going to talk about musical intent. At 24, you and I both instinctively were leaning into the end of the phrase, but nobody wants to hear da, dee, dee, dee. So we've got to find a way to stagger breathe with younger players, which is fine. We can do that, but we've got to allow the line to fully develop, and we can't do that if we put a breath right in the middle of a sentence, right? We can't do that. And then here's another thing that people don't very often realize. When you see what's going on here, we're mezzo piano, very intentionally, I've marked these folks at mezzo forte. So let's just get literal for a moment. They're starting a dynamic level higher. There's a 1 beat overlap here. And when they release, this group is already crescendoing to where you shouldn't even necessarily hear the woodwinds releasing at all. All right. And so those are the kinds of things that I think that's a great score study thing. Like looking at that going, okay, I see what he did there. There's a texture thing going on. So let's just go backward just a tiny bit and see if we can hear that. I do want to make a comment about the ritardando. Lots of groups, whether it's this piece or any other piece, when we talk about finding the music and score study, we see those retardandos, but our instinct is to get a little bit nervous. The instinct is to get a little bit nervous because they're middle school kids or they're young non-varsity groups or whatever they might be. And we worry, well, I don't want to pull back too much because I don't want the group to fall apart. Right. And so, or maybe, well, let's just put that on the Met. Everything else has been on the Met. Let's put it on the Met and get everything together, which there's value there. I'm not saying that there's not. But there's value there. But let's make sure everything is lined up and maybe not pull back so much so the group stays together. And I talk about it all the time. And so many friends, right? John Mackey, Frank DeKelly, Robert Sheldon. I go on and on and on and on. That we've been in performances, whether it's at a state convention, whether it's at Midwest, wherever it might be, where we've heard a group execute a ritardando and not do very much of one at all. The group stays perfectly together, and the only issue is that they destroy the music, but the group stays perfectly together, right? It's like, man, they nailed it. They were perfectly together, and they killed the music. And so I love to stretch that boom, 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 right? It creates a sense of anticipation, especially because we've got this deliberate march tempo coming up, right? And so that was a big thing for me. And I'll tell you right now, when I go through a score, I'm looking at all the places that I want to deliberately pull back, right? Gerard Hall's Loch Lomond is a great example of that. And I'm a matter of fact, we might end with that just to show a couple examples of that. But I've worked with several middle school groups on that piece where I will tell them, listen, in the concert, I will not follow you. I am going to slow down. I'm going to be musical the way I need it to be. And if we fall apart, then we fall apart with me knowing that I was making music, period. And that, by the way, that usually gets their attention. And I've not had a group that completely fell apart on me yet. You're right. But I've had plenty of directors that have just said, I've never heard a middle school group play that musically before. So there is that element of it. Let's just spend another minute or two on this, and then maybe I will pull up Gerard's piece and just kind of share a couple things before we close up here. Sorry. Now I want to talk about a few things here. The interpretation here at 34. Stylistically, those notes are not marked with anything. But that, of course, never means that we don't do anything. And so I hear a lot of groups at 34 going, do, 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 dee, 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 which they're thinking, well, it's the national anthem of Ukraine, so maybe it's more of a lyrical thing. But in my mind, I just said it's a deliberate march, like they're coming in. And so I'm thinking about, what does this kind of remind me of? Well, to be honest, it reminds me a little bit of 1812, right? And it's a similar application there of the 1812 overture. And so if you're thinking about it in that context, it's not yet. There's snippets of the Ukrainian theme, okay? But they're not the actual theme yet. And so because of that reason, I like to have a little bit of lightness to this. Finding that middle ground, and you're going to hear that. And then it starts to broaden up just a little bit right here. And then it gets bigger, a little bit longer. Line is right here. And even if you're a low are playing the melodic line, I tell people all the time, even if you have half notes, you are playing a duet with the melodic line there. And even right there at 38, there's a slight, 58, a slight crescendo, something happening there. Having the horn crescendo into that concert B flat. We'll get into there's something else I want to get to here, and maybe I'll just let it go. Now, right here, I'm looking at the word with determination. That is informing how the euphonium and trombone is playing the whole note. A lot of times, everybody's like, all right, trombone, euphonium, you guys get out of the way. That's the melodic line. Whole notes can be the melodic line. And I think sometimes, again, we say moving notes, come out, big notes, get out of the way. And there's two instances here where I do not agree with that. This is one of them. Looking at those very subtle dynamics and articulations. Now, here's a great example. right here at 82, so many groups say, all right, hold on, there's a lot going on here. We need to make sure that we hear the chorale coming up at 84. So woodwinds, come down. Percussion, come down. So we can hear that line. Okay. We have this element of cannons coming in. You can see the timpani part right there at 83. These are cannon shots. We are in the height of war right now. And if anything, right, that chorale at 84, yes, we want to hear the chorale, but that chorale is painted on a canvas of sound. And if that canvas of sound is not fully present, that chorale can't be effective. And so I always tell people, right, we're looking at the percussion. The percussion is playing out. The percussion is playing out. The woodwinds, that is a big sound because we're, again, at the height of war. We're thinking about the context of the music. And that enables all of this to happen. You can hear I'm not having everybody get out of the way. And if you have all of that, that uncertainty, that dissonance, that almost cacophony at times, then when you reach the downbeat of 92 and all of a sudden we have that first B flat major chord, it changes everything, right? Let the horns lead. Finding the phrase, the key. They will follow you if you make them follow you. So it gives you a really good idea, right, of those things. And we're barely scratching the surface in my mind, right? Mm-hmm. Barely scratching the surface of that. I want to remind people, though, of all the things that I'm looking at, right? I'm looking at line. I'm looking at knowing that really all music is either going somewhere or coming from somewhere. What is it doing? Asking myself, where is the peak of the phrase? Right? Where are those things that I can do, that I can pull back? And so to me, that really drives the whole thing. You know, I would like to take about, I don't know, 2 minutes and just share with you this score to Loch Lomond, because it's not mine. And I think it's great to be able to look at this now saying, all right, now I'm not just the conductor saying, or the composer saying, oh, this is what I do with my piece. But let's look at this Loch Lomond by Gerard Hall. So look at this opening here, okay? So we're looking at the opening, no dynamic marking, no tempo marking other than adagio, okay? We have a little crescendo here, fine, and nothing here, right? So really we just have going from 12 into 13, right? So what I would love to do is really just play the opening until 17. Okay, and then we'll stop and we can do any final thoughts. But I would like you to hear kind of musical decisions that I made as I was conducting this, because this is me conducting. So here we are. I'm starting off a little softer than mezzo piano. Notice I'm bringing out clarinet 2. Now watch this. I'm stretching. 2, 1, right? Listen to how I'm stretching. folks are playing with the melody. So you get an idea, right? And so that's just a little bit of a snippet in there. And there's a million places where there's no ritardando marked. There's nothing marked, but it makes so much sense to pull back. And that's in the music everywhere. And so that's the other thing that I'm always looking at. And I mentioned it once, but I'll mention it again. Where does the music need to breathe where it's not formally indicated, breathe here? And what I mean by breathe, whether we're talking about an actual breath or whether the music just needs to pull back or to push forward. So those are, in my mind, the real elements of score study. Those are the things that I want people looking at when they open up my score or any of the music that they're conducting. Right? Where are those little gems hidden that are not time signatures, that are not key signatures, that are not cues to mark? Those are all great, but we need to stop calling that score study. That's like performance stuff. And I remember, there are some conductors, I think Gary Green was one of them, when he would study the score, he would mark a lot of those things, but then as he became more familiar with it, he would erase them. Like he would erase the cues. He would erase the different things as he kind of became more and more familiar with it. And of course, I'm talking about scores like Rite of Spring, which is something that he conducted with us, but all the same, it still applies.
Right. And you've really hit on two things that are so important. First of all, that we need to look and discover the whys of the composer. Why did they write this? And also feel free to make musical decisions that will make the music come alive. And this is, I knew you would be so perfect for this, Brian. And I wish we could just do this for hours and hours and hours. There are a number of YouTube interviews that you've done that I encourage people. One of them that I checked out last night was, what constitutes a good performance, which, and all of this is great. And I wish we had more time, but I know your time is very valuable. And I thank you so much for sharing your ideas. I know that there's not a person watching this that hasn't enjoyed sharing your music with their ensembles. So please keep doing what you're doing. And again, I'm so grateful for your thoughts, and I know everybody's going to enjoy this. Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you.
So what a gold mine do we have in people like Brian Balmages. And we continue this next session in April with the inimitable Julie Giroux. So we hope you'll tune in. And if you want to take a deeper dive into this, again, these are very short segments. Come to Conselmer, our summer workshop. The Conselmer Institute has some of the best people in the business. And if you've been, you know how alive you come with the possibilities of making even more music. So happy music making, gang. See you next month.
I remember the first one 25 plus years ago. It was 21 people in the Ramada Inn in Elkhart, Indiana. Wow.
CSI to me is like going and having family time with some of your best friends. Even though your first time, you may not know anybody, but when you leave, you know everybody.
If when school's out, you sort of have time to do it, you have the time. And also it's not expensive. And that's another way that our servant leadership is expressed. We're saying, come on, come join us. It's an elite group that's not elite.
If you want an opportunity to truly deepen your practice, to truly think about what you're bringing to the stage and think about how we can get better at it, which is, I think, in the heart, what do we want? For the good of our students, for the good of ourselves, for the good of our longevity in the profession, CSI is much more than that booster shot. CSI is that salve that's going to shore us up.
I tell everybody it is a must do. That if you enjoy going to your state conference, that's great. This is like your state conference on steroids. It is so tailor-made for the people who attend that you just have to do it.
The intimacy of CSI is unmatched. Small groups, 20, 25 in a group, and with the clinician, it's highly interactive, conversational. The growth and learning doesn't happen one directional, it's multi-directional stuff. And it's not just the clinics, it's afterwards, it's in between, it's the meals, it's the sharing of stories with each other. And so the engagement is at an incredibly high level, and every person is valued and treated like royalty at CSI.
When you step on the campus at Bethel, you suddenly go, wow. Yes, it's a small world, and there's people from all over the place, but it's a family. And you have literally band gods there that are doing presentations, and they come and sit down and have dinner with you and truly want to talk with you and chat with you and know really what's going on.